Good afternoon, actually it's evening from wherever you're watching us from, and welcome to the debate circle. And today we have a very power-packed subject that we're going to be speaking about, and it's all about the media and Kenya. Definitely looking at the question whether the media has failed in, amongst other things, being a watchdog for the Kenyan people. What an interesting subject to bring in, especially now that we have a lot of things that are being launched. Talking about the BBI and all these things that are happening, and the question of whether objectivity will reign in the media, or are there other underlying things that really affect what content we get from across the media platforms that we have. That is radio, the newspapers, name them, televisions and all. And so joining us today to help us in these conversations is Stephanie Wachira, right on my left, and then on my right is immediate right, that's Mohammed Abdullahi. Then on my far left is Jane Acheng, and on my far right is Grace Kinyo. I'll say, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. All right, so I won't take much of a time before we kickstart this, but I only want to ask you, if you're watching from wherever you are, to kindly join in into the conversation by also answering this question. Do you believe, or do you think the media has failed in being the watchdog for the Kenyan people? Do you believe that the media has failed? In your own opinion, just give us your comments and we'll be checking them out. So the other thing I want to request you to do is to share this conversation, because we want to have an honest conversation and you being involved from wherever you're watching us from. So just a bit of house rules. For the speakers right here, you will have 3 minutes to just give your opening remarks. I'll not call them opening, they could be the main remarks on your opinion on this subject, so that at least we who are listening to you can probably get to know your mind on these issues. Without an order of who is going to start and who's going to finish, so I want to start with Stephanie. I will open the floor. You have 3 minutes, and it's timed. And just to know that it's timed, there's a bell. Bell, please. That's the bell. And so, Stephanie, you have 3 minutes to open.
It's an interesting concept that we even have a bell.
Yes.
So my name is Stephanie Wachira, and I'll just get right into it. On whether or not I feel like the media has failed us, I think the first important thing is for us to understand what is the role of the media. And the role of the media is not something that can be summarized in few words. First of all, I feel as if it's something that is very diverse, because the media is, first of all, an institution, and then it narrows down to the journalists themselves. So the role of the media as an institution is very different from what a media personality can feel like their role is as a citizen contributing to society in their capacity. So the role of the media as an institution, I feel as if, is acting as an informant, a detached observer who reports transparently on issues in society. And so for us to get to whether or not they have failed us, we are questioning, have they done that? Have they been transparent in offering information? Have they been an observer? Have they played to public interest? So in my honest opinion, I feel like the media has had its strides. I can't entirely say that the media has failed us, but then again, I cannot entirely celebrate the media in its entity. I genuinely believe that there is quite some work to be done. So far, there's quite a lot of misgivings, things that could be very directly tied to either their choosing to not step up to the task, or alternatively, them being put in places where they actually want to, but can't. But the fact of the matter remains, whether or not it was in their power to control certain elements, that they have failed, at least in my opinion. But I'd really love to hear what the entire panel thinks. Of course, I am very open to the idea that they may not have failed us, but it would be very interesting to see how this discussion plays out. Yeah.
All right. I feel like that's a 50-50 judgment from your end. Let me cross over to this other side, and Mohammed Abdullahi, you'll give us your views on this subject. Has the media failed in its role as the watchdog for the Kenyan people? You have 3 minutes, Mohammed.
So thank you very much, Maina. My name is Mohammed. It's a very tough judgment to make and to entirely rubbish them off as a failure, or on the other side to claim a success out of what they have done. So I'll start by agreeing with Stephanie that yes, the media, judging them from a very wide perspective and a very wide roles that they perform in society, and going into each and every one of them, I think we'll come to a conclusion of they have performed extremely well in certain instances, and they have extremely failed us in other instances. And only from then can we make a decisive decision on whether to categorize it as a success or not. Equally, we will start by looking at maybe, are they just outsiders, unaligned observers who just transmit the news to us? Is that particularly their role? Or do we always want them to take a side? That side being what we believe is the right side, or what society in essence believes to be right? Is it necessary for them to take a side? Or is it only enough for them to just transmit the news, transmit the happenings of the day, and stay out as unaligned observers? I also think that we will equally be wanting to question that, do we place an extreme burden on an entity that is already overburdened with a lot of their own inner problems, arising from the lack of probably even quality journalists, arriving from the biasness of individuals, because even individuals come to entities with their own biasness. So I think we'll have a quality discussion along those lines. Those are my views to begin with. Thank you.
Very interesting views there, Mohammed, that the media is already overburdened and they're both extremes. Still another 50-50 there from my perspective. So I want to cross over to Jane to as well give your remarks on this subject. Has the media failed?
Thank you, Maina. My name is Jane. I think I would agree on the concept that we cannot entirely say that the media has failed us. Neither can we agree that to the capacity that we expect them to have flourished, that they have surpassed that. Although, just to lay things into context, every time when I hear the conversations of media houses and media personalities, I tend to believe that we cannot separate the institution and the people who work from the institution. Because if you are a strategic planner for your media house, you set the tone from the top going down. In a sense that even the interns that come to work at a specific media house know that this is how things function here. So what you see is a revelation of how the chain of command flows. So I can't really say that I'd look at a media institution differently from how I'd look at the journalists, because the business model has to be cohesive. If we are laying out a plan, the plan has to be executed from the CEO to the editors to the journalist. So it's just an outcome of several decisions that we finally get to see as TV or news or radio. When we look at it from the concept of how media has evolved and how I will tend to look at, does that evolution warrant it being successful or being a failure? And to that length, I'd say they've tried. Okay. It's been a success. Because I'm looking at in the Nyayo era where we have this policy that we want to spread as peace, love, and unity. And as a media house, you are mandated with this has to be the it thing. It has to look like it's peace, love, and unity. Every other thing, every other forms of dictatorship, every other forms of violation of human rights cannot be aired out in the public. And it ran for decades of time. So if I'm comparing that to the transition that we're having to the kind of media houses and the conversations we're having today, I'd definitely give it a success, in the sense that there's growth, and not just growth in how we're reporting this media, it's even growth on who can we talk about on TV. If I can sit here today and mention Nyayo without fear of having to hide later, then that's a transition. So if we're looking at the evolution of media, then I would say that's success. But if we're looking at it from moving forward and the trends currently and the business model, I'd say it's a failure. So it's more of a 50-50 juggle for me.
All right, Jane, another 50-50 right there. As if I'm putting down some marks right here. 50-50, another one, right? All right, Grace, over to you. In your opinion, has the media failed in its role as watchdog?
Thank you. My name is Grace Kenyan. I think I'll be a bit more harsh, actually. And I completely agree. They have tried, and they should try. But then there's a complacency with institutions in this country. We have a system of the police are trying to do well, and the medical sector is trying to do well. So at what point do we say, this is your role, this is what you're supposed to do, other countries are doing it or, trying to do it, but at what point do we say, we'll hold you accountable for exactly what you're supposed to do? And I think also when you look at the media and are they actually working? The question is, do they have the power to work? And when you point out things like different bias or being overburdened, that's perfectly fine. But then, do they still have a role that they ought to fulfill? Yes, and I think that's why things come in. And you talk about the media being a watchdog for the people. I think the question is, what do you mean the people? Which people exactly? Because I think some people would say it is actually a good watchdog because it serves their interest, which goes back to power. Who exactly is the media serving? And essentially, who are they supposed to serve? The Kenyan people. But who are they essentially serving? It's a select few of the elite who are then responding to this thing. And you say that they've done, sometimes they've done really well, but they're supposed to. Why are they getting brownie points for doing their job? Do you go to doctors and say, oh, you've done really well? You do not do that. So then why are we giving so much rope to this particular institution? And also, I think finally, when you look at the media and their role, I think it's also a question of to what extent are they allowed to work? To what extent have we allowed them to work? Because when you see investigative journalism, when we see people who do certain reports on key issues in our communities that kind of touch on our rituals, our habits as Kenyans, our traditions, we start to say, we don't like this person, they're intruding, this is an Kenyan, this is an African. And that's the thing. I don't think we're also ready to allow for them to really come up and to really do their job. So I would say that they're doing their job and they're not doing it well. That's it.
Okay, at least we have one person who believes these people have room for improvement to do a better job. Thank you so much, Grace, for your comments. Before I allow us now to ask each other a little bit of the critical side of it, I just want to prompt our viewers today on the subject of the day. We are asking the question, has the media failed in its role as a watchdog for the society today, especially here in Kenya? So that's a discussion. What's your opinion? Please share your views as well. Share whatever you feel. Do you think they're doing a good job? Do you think they're not doing a good job? And especially now when we need a lot of critical information on the decisions we're about to make. Ladies and gentlemen, where do I start? Let me throw it to Jane. Jane, what's your opinion on what you've had the panelists speak about?
Well, I'd echo specifically back to Grace.
Yes.
Grace has very strong opinions on how the media has failed because they ought to do their job. That's what's expected of a media house. And putting it like that, it's good. It's like, why are we praising fathers for raising their children when that is ideally what a parent should do? It's the same thing we're using it now as an analogy to media houses. We ought not to praise them because that's the role of a media house. Mm-hmm. But then I want to echo specific environments that make it, that to some extent allow us to play the devil's advocate. In terms where the environment is not enabling for transparency, for independence. And in African states specifically, there has been turbulence in the environment for very long periods of time, in the sense that there is no balance of power between people in politics, people in government, and common mwananchis. Therefore, that environment, if it's not enabling, if it's not facilitating for independent journalism to occur, then in the few instances that we see a media house do a story that's very controversial and air it, then we give them points for that. But does one controversial story represent all the other stories that ought to be talked about? No. Then there comes the question of, so why do we just have that one headline story that's done by Alan Namu and Muhammad Ali, and then we're going to carry that as the face of the entire media house, which brings us to the question of, how do we handle the business model and the media houses? We package it in such a way that it's more of entertainment, because politics and propaganda sells. So what do? We'll pick prime time specifically for politics. And it's not the politics of where we're putting our leaders of position in accountable places. No, it's the politics of, let me hear what Ruto has to say back to Uhuru today, or let us hear what Miguna has to respond back today. And you see, that sells. You will find very many houses on that specific time, that's what they want to watch. Because we've tapped into the business model of numbers and traffic, which is allowed. You tend to view the ratings of your media house based on who's watching. Based on who's watching. So now there comes the question of, what is good news anymore?
Okay. I think I get where you're coming from, Jane. And before I cross over to Stephanie, there's a very strong point that you've raised there, which I tend, as a moderator, still tend to agree with you, that we are most likely too politicized. In terms of the media, because the stories that we have to sell, it's more like we are more on the sale agenda. And that's the reason why the headlines without a political face will not sell. And that's why it's the competition of what we have to do. And that, for me, tells me that you're more falling towards Grace's side, that we have failed. Stephanie, over to you. What's your comments with regards to the conversation?
On that one thing, I feel as if I'd actually say the media has failed us, for the simple reason that politics is not the problem. I genuinely don't feel like politics causes conflict. It is the way that politics is packaged and broken down for the common mananchi, and how it is, it's sold to the people on the ground. It is how we present the conflict in public discourses, not entirely the conflict. And for that simple reason, I feel as if the media has failed us, because if you look at how they package some of this content, and let's go back to, and it's been a very, like you've said, it's been a very interesting period for Kenyan politics, especially if you look at it in that angle. Go back in 2007 and what happened in 2007 and the role that media played leading up to the point where people were so polarized, It was, of course, a very large part politics, but then again, it was also how the media let it play out in public discourses. And that's why we had certain people who were, of course, interdicted at the ICC for issues that they said. If you look at 46 or 47% of Kenyans opinions being shaped by what they hear on radio, you're looking at a 20% that says, listen, what I see on TV really informs the political decisions I make, or what I think about the general atmosphere. And then that means that the media has carved a niche for itself, that it has the autonomy to shape public opinion. And for that reason, how it paints things is very key. So it's really not about the politics being bad, it's about how the media chooses to paint it. When you come and regurgitate, which is not your role, by the way, the role of the media is outside of just coming to regurgitate what a politician said. Once you get information, is there a system that says, this is what we've gotten, this is how we're going to synthesize it, and this is how we're going to paint it? Of course, it can look like manipulation, but then again, if there's no system that exists of that kind, we are going to have a situation like back in 2007 where politicians were left to roam free on our airwaves, and we see what that did and where that left our country. So I feel as if the media really, really needs to step up in terms of, I'm not interested in hearing what politician A said, I'm interested in hearing what their sentiments mean for me as a citizen. How does the BBI affect me politically, economically, socially? Don't come and tell me this is what the politician said. I really couldn't care less at that point. Can you break down issues for us? Because what has happened in Kenya is that we have sensationalized the media. And that is the reason why, like Jen has said, if it is not controversial, it won't sell. And the business model now plays into all this, where we're looking at the numbers, and that's why we don't care about how it is packaged, or rather, either we don't care about how it is packaged, or we package it a certain way to ensure that the numbers at the end of the day match. So that is one of the biggest failures of the Kenyan media. But of course, there could be someone who could very easily say that we are misunderstood, or there's so many other angles that play into that, and I'd like to see how that conversation plays out to that effect. But from where I stand now, for that reason, the media has actually failed us.
All right, and because we're debaters, we shall at least give credit where it's due, and I know I'll be putting on the spot to speak about the positives of the media and what we have seen as well. I know sometimes it could be very hard, especially for Grace, to find out such things. Now, very quickly, I think the takeout is, it's not just about what they say, but it's what they say and the meaning of what they say to our lives as we go ahead. Now, there's a question here, and I think before I cross over to the other end, that we also need to ask ourselves, is it just about being a watchdog versus also driving an agenda? Because the media as well has the responsibility to do that. And Mohammed, I want to cross over to you, because you said that sometimes we may be also having a bias on ourselves, and we expect the media to report that way because that's what we believe. I think I got that from your sentiments. And sometimes you also say that maybe we have bedeviled the media with so many things, and they also have their issues. I don't know whether you've changed your mind over the time, and what your comments will be. Over to you, Mohammed.
Absolutely not minor. And this is why I was saying that the biases of individuals still play.
Okay.
But Stephanie tells you that the media has failed because they have not incorporated those biases. Okay. Stephanie wants the media houses to establish a system by which they synthesize the information and then package it in a way that she wants to hear, in a way that she thinks will not cause the violence of 207. I think, yes, it was a very terrible thing what happened at 207-28.
Yeah.
But I think that fear that the same could happen has put us in a situation where we do not want people to say what they want to say. And it is absolutely okay for politicians to say what they want to say, and for people to hear that politician A said this and this and this. But because we have this a genuine fear, which is very okay to have, that we do not want the country to go back to where it was in 2007 or 2008, but at what expense? At what expense? Do we lose out on things that we needed to hear? So I think it is that bias that we want them to sometimes play into that can essentially be the problem.
Before I cross over, and I think you're not yet done with your points, eh?
Yes.
Can I just throw this question to you?
Yes.
Do you think the media is biased?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's a
because
good one. Go ahead.
This is the thing. Yeah. Jane equally says that we cannot separate the entity and the individuals.
Yeah.
I strongly think that it is okay to separate the entity and the individuals. This is what happened at the headquarters of all major news organizations. The top floors are occupied by the business people, the people who have to come to shareholders every quarter and tell them that this is how the business is doing. Okay. It is not always that the business goals of these entities go in line with the ethics and the expectations that we have journalists of. And the question now becomes, what happens when the financial reports are not matching with the journalistic reports? They are not in line. What happens and who loses out? So I think that most of the time, it is the journalist, it is the reporter who is going to miss out at the expense of the executive, of the business executive. Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Mohammed. Grace, sorry. I don't know whether you've been converted or you're still on your end. Go ahead.
I think everyone makes valid points when they say that the media does have a role, and they've done things that, we can commend them for, but I'm not ready to give out trophies just yet. But I think with regard to driving an agenda, we have seen exactly what the media can do. We've seen it in Rwanda, we've seen it in Kenya, we've seen it in the United States. Continually, we see representations of exactly how impactful they can be, their ability to change conversations in society, their ability to inform even the kind of political culture that we have within our countries. And so I think we cannot underplay the role that, that they have in our society. But then also I think Mohab, offers a really good point. He talks about the money, because we can speak English about all of these ethical issues, but then at the end of the day, people need to get paid. There's a bottom line, it needs to be met. So then when you talk about sensationalizing politics, and actually I was thinking about when Seth was saying, when you look at why it's so sensational, do you know we are so desensitized to what it means to us politically, economically, socially, that it becomes entertaining. It is entertainment. We don't think of it as BBI rally, okay, what does this mean for my education, for my son's health? It becomes who was dancing with who. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. So we've become so desensitized to exactly what is happening, and I think the media continues to play to that. But then also, I don't think the media is in any way, shape, or form dumb. I don't think that is the case. I think they know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly what images they're bringing to our screens. They know exactly what headlines they're putting there. And the reason why we've seen certain media houses put particular headlines is because it's entertaining. If it's entertaining, that it means that more people are watching. More people are watching. What exactly are they watching? And so then it's not just falling from nowhere. I think it's very directed. I think there's a clear agenda.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Grace. Let me just throw in some of this, a statement, first of all, by one of the renowned writers. She's called Rashna Wara. And in her comment, and she's one of the bold journalists that had to resign from NMG, she was a commentator. She writes this and says that commercial interests and the interests of media owners often determine the content of newspapers. That's a very tough statement to say there. That editors happily give in to these interests because newspapers are for-profit organizations and depend on revenue to survive. And I think that's what exactly, Mohammed, you were trying to allude to. That at the end of it all, those guys sitting at the top there are business people, and at the end of it all, it's what is the return. So my question to you guys is this. To what extent does this statement feel true to you? And the other thing is, are there underlying hands of just business and the profit margins that define what we end up getting from the media? What's your opinion? I don't know, I want to throw it randomly. Yes, go ahead, Jane.
I think I do agree with the statement, actually. And I look at it from a different angle. The influences that play behind what we see on TV.
Yeah.
If you look at Kenya historically in the, let me say, the 1980s and the 1970s, the academia that formed the civil society is a very different form of academia than the one we have now. And it echoes in the sense that the reason why we were even able to experience an evolution is because the civil society was very, I'd say, woke in pointing out issues that were not okay, either on media or in government. But then what do we see now that is different from the 1980s and the 1970s? We have an assemblage of organizations that have very diverse interests, and that becomes very easy to manipulate. And how do we manipulate that? We manipulate that on media. How do we package it? We have print, we have TV, we have our social media. So what do? To each of these civil society or organizations, we will give you an agenda that we will sell. Runs on TV or on our digital platforms has to tap into that agenda. So we essentially are the ones who have failed ourselves. Because we sit in civil societies and we feel like we're the elite. We determine what should run and play in the country. So then commercial interest is at the bottom line. We failed to hold the aspect of maintaining human rights and civic education, and we started selling into our bipartisan interest. Individualism, ideally, is what happened. We no longer see the Law Society and, for example, the human rights as one entity. We see them as two entities in the sense that we will defend the elite and the human rights will struggle with those ones that cannot represent themselves. So the concept of agenda stems from us. Yeah, in our places of work, the agendas that we're pushing behind the scenes, that's what we get to see on TV, a reflection of actually what we are.
All right, and that begs the question to then think through, who are the media owners behind all these media entities that we have? And we will find out that most of them are politicians or politically aligned to certain ways, and so you would also question the aspect of objectivity. I'm supposed to be the moderator, not take sides, so I'm trying to, but it looks like we are flowing in one direction. There was a recent actually just a few days back, I don't know whether you guys in your research found out, Anne Kiguta was supposed to host one of the key opponents, I think on this BBI agenda and the likes, but she was bold enough, and in my opinion very objective, to come out and say that the interview has been cancelled because the management did not feel it was right to host that gentleman. Well, I want to throw it here on the floor. What is your opinion in that, and what is your takeout on that as well? Who's ready to pick up this? Stephanie, let me throw it to you.
So first of all, I think I'll start by addressing some of the things that you've heard before. Like,
Yeah, sure.
there's a point that Grace said, and she talked about how we have become so desensitized to certain things. And I feel as if we may not have become desensitized to them. It's that we do not, because I feel as if there actually are people who crave a media that actually does what it is supposed to do, because there are so many gaps to be filled, and that's why you see some of the stations that have the largest following, yeah? And I'll use the example that I think I had used some time back, but I'll repeat it. The other time, there was a time that I was tuning into Metropole TV, and it's not a mainstream media. It's not amongst Royal Media Service. It's not in NMG. It's just it's a TV station. There's such few people who've heard of it, and I was watching, and they usually have something called Business AM. And on Business AM, they were discussing the debt burden in Kenya. Now, I'll compare that to one of the mainstream medias that was talking about the debt burden in Kenya and how they put it. And I'm going to compare the two of them. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the mainstream media and how it painted the debt burden. It put a really big figure, I think in the trillions, and everybody panicked and started talking about how, we'd have to pay 70,000, I think, to the fourth generation. I really don't remember how well they put it, but that is how they did it. And then we come to Metro, and they chose to take a very different approach. And they talked about how, listen, it's really not about the debt burden or how many billions or trillions we've taken. It's really about where it goes. So the problem in Kenya is really not that we are borrowing, is that we really don't know how to go about the money that we borrow. We are using it for recurrent expenditure as opposed to development expenditure. And if you look at other countries that have a higher borrowing ratio, it's not, of course, ceteris paribus, holding all the other factors constant. If you take just the debt ratio, it really doesn't matter if it's used for development expenditure. And now, the reason why I painted that particular scenario is because I feel as if we aren't desensitized. I would any other day now follow Metropole TV as opposed to going the side of a mainstream media, because that's where I get the actual information. I feel as if the failure of certain media stations, and that's why we're saying mainstream medias, the ones that have the followings to the millions, the tens of the millions, the failure of those does not necessarily reflect the entire, media. And that's why I said we cannot entirely say everybody has failed. But the failure of a few stations doesn't necessarily reflect that. I feel like as Kenyans, we are not entirely desensitized. And then I think Mohammed, before Jane, I think Mohammed talks about how the media stations may now be scared to go into certain things because of what happened, and therefore that limits certain things about objectivity. And this is what I'd say. And here I'm going to concede, and then now I'd make an argument. I'll concede using something called virtue ethics, yeah? And of course, this is in comparison to the 2013 and the 2007 general election. So virtue ethics basically states it places emphasis on character as opposed to action. So basically what we mean is, I'll give a very quick example. If you've been honest and you are considered an honest person, there's very many ways we can look at it. It's either you have been honest in every single thing you have done. You have never lied, you have never cheated anyone, you've never stolen, you've been honest, period. But then virtue ethics then questions, is someone who is honest fail themselves in being honest? If today if someone comes and hides in my house today, and I'm considered an honest person, and a kidnapper knocks on my door and asks me, is the person I'm looking for here? And I say no, does that make me any less honest? Yeah? It doesn't make me less honest, because it is looking at the value of how life moves on after that particular decision. And the reason why I talked about that was because in 2013, that's what we saw. We saw a very scared media, yeah, because they had seen what had happened in 2007 and the share of blame they took for the things that happened. And I understand 2013, but we are in 2020, 7 years later. Of course, I agree that absolute objectivity is a fallacy, and it does not really serve the interests of the people it is supposed to serve. It is the virtue ethics element of it, where they see this is what needs to be put out there, and this is how it needs to be praised. This is how it needs to be phrased so that people are not polarized. But they have had 7 years to figure that out. So that is the reason why I still believe in that light they have failed us. That we're still tiptoeing on certain things because we're scared of how it was painted back in 2013. We've had 2 general elections since then. They have had time.
All right. I'll give you 30 more seconds on the other part.
It's fine. So you've asked me about how
the latest
and that's why I said you can actually separate certain journalists, or you can separate journalists, people who decided to be outliers, like you've said, Anne Kiguta, and I respect her for that she came and said, listen, I really wanted to have this conversation, but the management didn't feel like, so it is not going to be that, but I have enough punch left in me. But I found that statement very interesting. But I think that is the problem we have in Kenya, that media ownership in Kenya, as opposed to how it should be or how it is in other countries, is very centered or geared towards a certain part, that it may not be owned by certain people, rather politicians, but it has certain elements or, that are very political. And again, now into the business model, because I feel as if those two cannot be separated. The numbers, like Grace has said, and like you've said, the political aspect of it. The problem at the end of the day is this, that there is a 47%, there's a 20%, there's a 6% that gets it from newspapers, that is waiting for that conversation to happen. But it is those people in the boardrooms, and it is a known tactic. The time people will be very annoyed with me. Yes. It's a known tactic that whenever you have people like the Anne Kigutas who are willing to go the extra mile for an honest conversation, for the conversations that people actually want to hear, you put them in boardrooms where no significant decisions are made, where it's about the numbers, does the credit and the debit side balance? Okay,
all right, let's close it at that. And I think it's important at this point to just salute Anne Kiguta from wherever she is. Stephanie believes that you did what you needed to do. Now, just a quick jointer. I'm already getting questions online that, remember, you can send in your questions as well. And the question for today is, has the media failed in, amongst other things, being the watchdog for the Kenyan people? We'll be as well sampling some of your questions, and if you have any to a particular person, name them so that at least we can get their point of view. I know, Jane, you wanted to just give a quick rebuttal before I cross over to this other end. Just go ahead.
I think when Stephanie says that we've not been desensitized, I'll give a very vivid example that's fresh on all our minds. Yes. The president yesterday was at Kisumu. Mm-hmm. Does any one of us know what the agenda of that meeting was? But what do we know? I'll ask Bilomondi because he comes from there later on. But what do we know? That he wanted to pick an extra wife from where? From Kisumu town. Right. How is that not desensitized media reporting? That trended more than the agenda of that meeting. You can ask the people that were present in that meeting, what was the agenda for that meeting? None of them knows. So yeah, it's a question of how does media represent these stories? The headlines is, now I will speak to my partner here, maybe I can get an extra one here. That is none of our issues. It is not a matter of national security. We don't need to know. Yes. And yes, it's the politics of handling a crowd and making sure people are happy, but it doesn't need to get airtime on TV. Okay, Jane. Point taken. I know, Stephanie, you want to give a rebuttal, but I need to cross over to the other side.
Maybe one quick statement.
Okay, one quick statement. Go ahead.
I think I'd ask Jane to that effect, and all of us in the panel, do you feel as if the fact that the media does not stand for anything in particular and is willing to sway to the side of the numbers then means that that is what they pick over the agenda? That now politicians know that if I make a controversial statement, I will trend more on the media, and I think we'll get back to this at some point. I will trend better on the media as opposed to if I go with content. Do we feel as if we've actually given politicians the space to run amok because the media will give them airtime?
Okay, this is a quick one.
A quick one, yeah. Yes. And that is the agenda, entertainment and propaganda. It's not a neutral stand.
Thank you, Jane. Okay, thank you, Jane. We'll get back to you guys. You can be taking your notes. Hey, my people, I know you have a lot to say as well. But before then, I just wanted to ask Jane this question to ponder. That probably we might be crucifying so much the media, and we are forgetting that nowadays that social media is part of it as well. And that there's a lot of agendas as well that are being created on the social media. I'll give you a quick example. When the known flight of COVID-19 came over and there was a Chinese flight that landed, we didn't get to know that from the mainstream media. It was just somebody who just took a record in and sent it. And it was a whole trending thing. I was one of among the people who tweeted very angry. Why would they allow such a thing to happen? And give credit to where it belongs. I mean, social media was the game. And the media now picked it up from there. So I would want us as well, even as we're looking at really pinpointing these things out, to also remember that there's a big part nowadays being played by the social media angle. Mohammed, what's your view on the current discussion so far?
Two things I pick out,
Yes.
Maina. One is that we have a problem with the current status quo of media ownership. It's very true. It is not just here, it's across the globe. That majority of large mainstream media are owned by conglomerates spanning the entirety of the world. And they have a problem. The problem they have is that they're not for the interest, their personal or their business interest or the biases of the individuals overrides those of the larger society. Using the example of Ann Kiguta. Ann Kiguta works for K24. MediaMax owns K24. MediaMax is owned by the Kenyatta family. Come to Nation Media Group. Nation Media Group, biggest shareholders, the Aga Khans. Very close business relationship with the First family. You go to the Standard Group, the same, the Moy family. So what do I think sort of acts as a solution? There's a good article I was reading about county newspapers in America, and that county small newspapers based out of offices or even offices where only 10 reporters work broke some of the biggest news of 2019.
Wow.
One example, the Miami Herald. The Miami Herald is the newspaper that broke the story of I can't remember the name. The guy with the children and the, sorry.
It's all right,
yes,
but what did they do?
Yes, the guy who was, who had children, taking them to his island, who was using children for sex purposes. Yes, Jeffrey Epstein, thank you very much. Broken by a small newspaper. Harvey Weinstein's story was not broken by any of the large mainstream media. Wow. So it tells you that probably what we need to start cultivating and the stories we need to start consuming is from smaller media outlets, just like Metropole, because probably those are the guys who are reporting what needs to be reported. Those are guys who are doing the job that needs to be done. Okay. And the article was giving a lot of credit to the small county newspapers. So I think the same is what should be happening here, that this large mainstream media do not have our interests at heart, and probably we should start consuming news from smaller outlets, because probably those guys are the guys who are doing the job right.
All right. Do you have one more?
Just one more. Jane talks about the president wanting another wife from Kisumu. Yes, that is very much clickbait. But is it really misinformation? No, it is not. It's just clickbait. The media did what they needed to do. As outliers, they reported what the president said, period. And that is what the media needs to do, to report as outliers. Whether you feel it is relevant or not, the president wants another wife from Kisumu.
In defense of Jane, honestly, was that the agenda of his visit? I think that was the point that she was trying to say, but yes.
Absolutely not. Probably they did report others, but it is this clickbait bit that probably went viral. But can we really hold them wrong for that? I do not think so.
You know, actually what I feel before I cross over to Grace, what I feel is that there's this journalist every Friday on Nation Media, NTV, that has this clip after the news. What's his name? I don't know whether it's called the man or something. It's quite funny, something, a bullseye. That's what they call it, is it? And I think, if you ask me my own opinion, such a thing about the lady that the president was being offered or something should be featured somewhere there, because now that's satire and it's purely for just entertainment. And but the clear agenda should have been for the people in Nyanza to understand that the president has come and has done this and that, and this is what it means to the people. So at that point, maybe probably I may tend to fall on the other end. Grace, over to you. Your thoughts so far?
I have plenty of thoughts, actually.
Yes.
think-
Sum them up in your 3 minutes. Go ahead.
I will try.
Yes.
I think I'll start at Anne Kiguta. Anne Kiguta, Caroline Mutuku, Larry Mado, Janet Mbugua, Carol Verdul, all of these are powerhouses in media. They have the muscle to say, I will do this, I will not do this. But to what extent is that muscle available to everyone? To what extent can we say that journalist X out of high school, out of university or college, journalist X can actually say, I will do this stories, I'll not do this stories. It is a privilege to be able to do that and to keep your job and to continue to receive airtime. And also, I think then we need to say kudos to Anne Kiguta for sure. But then we need to be able to empower journalists within these media houses to say, this is my stance, and not have them thinking, will I lose my job? Will there be backlash for this particular action? I think that's where I'm at on Anne Kiguta. Concerning social media, I think social media is very interesting in that there's a lot of things that go unchecked. But also, it also means that a lot of things, there are no gatekeepers, basically. You post your video, it's out. It gets views, and there we go. So you don't necessarily need a huge name, you just need a good story, and it's out there. But then I think the thing that I'm wary of social media is, first of all, unchecked or things that are not factual. And I know John Alanamu's African Uncensored has a system called Piga Firimbi, whereby they actually spotlight and they say this is actually not factual, things of that nature. But then also with social media comes a new phenomenon that is performative activism. You see a lot of influencers, being called out and being cancelled for not posting certain things, like the End SARS movement currently. And what happens is that you have performative activism whereby people are saying things, people are posting things because they should, because it's good for their brand, because they don't want to be cancelled. And then that brings the question, are we really catering to the agenda? Are we actively post Blackout Tuesday? Are we donating? Are we actively working? Are we studying? Are we educating ourselves? And I think that is the thing that social media is not able to fully do, because there's no after. There is now, there's sensational, there's clicks, and then what, And concerning smaller, media houses and non-mainstream, media that are not mainstream, I think the question is, what if they made it big? Do you think they would change, or do you think they'd stay the same? So then, who's to say that today you're reporting proper news, you don't have a particular sponsor, there's no particular big agenda, so what happens tomorrow? So are they actually people who have integrity, or is it because they don't have those particular sponsors in this moment in time? And it goes back to, what is the role of the media? When you talk about clickbait and our president saying all of these things, you use clickbait either because you can't get views and you need to get them, or use clickbait because people don't care enough to know what he was doing there, and so now you have to find a way to get the agenda in there. That's not the case. They're not doing it so that they can tell you what he was doing. They're doing so that you can be entertained and so that they get views, and that is the problem. I think that's what Jenny's trying to say. And we need to actively hold them accountable for factual stories, for proper stories, for, give me more. Give me more till I say, I don't understand. Bring an analyst. I don't understand. I don't like, it's too much. Give the people that, because I think it is very disrespectful to say, oh, you cannot possibly comprehend this, therefore I will just offer you these tiny nuggets and hope they're entertaining. I think they need to give us more until people say, I think that's enough. We've not gotten there yet.
All right, time up on your end now. Wow, quite a mouthful. If you're watching, what's your opinion? What's your opinion? Has the media failed? Now, guys, let me just throw in these two questions that have just popped in. There's a gentleman called Ndegwa, and he's asking, how can the media balance between objectivity and protecting the public from public harm? Wow, that's an interesting question. How can the media balance between objectivity and protecting the public from public harm? I think I would want Jane to consider checking through that. But before you answer that, the other question would be this. What do you think of public-funded media houses to ensure objective is prioritized? I think this is objectivity is prioritized rather than commercial interest. I think so. That's a very interesting angle. So I think because I want to prepare, because time is almost up, I think in your concluding remarks of your stand and everything that you believe in, I would want you to do this. I would want you to sort of sum it up as you try give a view on that question. Over to you, Jane.
To answer the question of protecting the public from public harm, it narrows down to two things: sensationalization, like sensitization, how we report these stories, the magnitude that we give specific things, the amount of fact checking that we do, and fact checking has to go down to the very least of things that you think are mundane. You have to set the record straight. I think people have, we've got into this globalization concept that we fail to realize traditional media actually has a very critical role of being a fact checker, because social media is untamed. Social media has a lot of agenda also being spilled over. We're failing to recognize that things like Facebook and Google and Gmail are also media outlets in their own nature. These companies collect data of all mannerisms and can manipulate it for agendas that are monetized. So we can't entirely say that social media is the place to go. To some capacity, yes, it has brought attention to things that would have not made it to mainstream media. But the key thing that mainstream media holds is being a fact checker. And that's where they're failing. So the question is not, oh, this is too sensitive for the public. The public is not ready for that story. It's how it's done. I was watching an interview some few months, I think it was a program on NTV, and they were reporting on the level of youth unemployment in the country. And I failed to see objectivity in one sense. All the examples were on the far left, in the sense of you had a PhD holder who was working on the streets, you had a third-year dropout, you had one that never made it to campus, and all of them are jobless. And I'm like, if we're looking at the statistics, generally speaking, how many PhD holders do you know that are outside there hustling because their PhD has failed them?
So that's a bias for you.
That's a bias for me. It's the fact checking that is not done correctly. Yes, there's youth unemployment, but report it in the correct manners. To what level, to what capacity? So it's more of how the reporting is done and not what is reported.
All right.
Should I answer the questions, or that comes later?
No, that will come later on. I think you also answered something in between that. So Stephanie?
Right. So first of all, I'll start by saying, and while of course we want to, like someone has talked about the role of social media in, the reason why the conversation around mainstream media is especially important and can potentially triumph over that of social media is the concept of the media rich and the media poor. So when you talk about the social media, you're talking about the media rich. And I'd ask you, how many people have access to social media, have access to Twitter, to, you know, in certain countries, like look at Kenya, for example. What is the penetration of social media versus the penetration of Radio Jambo? To what extent do we hold social media accountable as opposed to the extent that we hold Radio Jambo accountable? How many people are tuning into Radio Jambo? How many people out of those can be tuning into Twitter? So, and that takes me to something that someone has talked about, the smaller media outlets. And while I like that we can tune into smaller media outlets that can have shown that public funding or some other type of funding that is not necessarily political can actually work for media stations, I feel as if that is letting the mainstream medias, the Royal Media Service, the Media Marks, get away with so much. If you're going to be funded and if you're going to be reaching out to 20 million people, we have no business having to go look for, you know, some other station just because you can't do your job. Do your job. There is no getting away with it. Sit there, do what they're doing, or go home. Then there's someone who talks about clickbait. And like I like what Grace has said, that it's not that we're doing clickbait so that we can slide in the agenda there because people are not willing to listen to serious agenda. First of all, it is conditioning. This is a classic Pavlov's conditioning, where you have made people think that news is another part of entertainment, that between 7 to 7:30, there is a comedy show that is relatively serious. That this is some other sort of Churchill, where you get a bit of business news and a bit of sports, but basically a whole nice Churchill vibe going. It is conditioning. Of course, we're going to lose on viewership for the first 2-3 months if you go into the serious stuff. What does the debt button mean for Kenya? What does, you know, certain things mean for Kenya? And I like the fact that the Wamboi Kolimo went into what should be on the news. And I respect the fact that, first of all, those are not stories that some people would sit down and watch. But if we go at it constantly, the way we've gone at the media puns constantly from certain media stations, and the way we've gone at the jokes and the bullseye constantly, and the politics, people will actually listen. Yeah, at some point, we will recondition them to the things that matter.
So for you, is the media should set the agenda.
Yes, and I feel as if what media fails to do is set their own agenda such that politicians have to play to that agenda. They are very agendaless to the point where anybody can now come and decide, listen, you don't look like ukona form, just come and play into mine. That's what happens, and that is a problem.
Stephanie, let me cut you short. But you will not watch. I mean, and I'll go broke, I'll close down. I want to hear Baba, I want to hear what Ruto has said, I want to hear those kind of stuff.
And that's the problem. You have conditioned people to thinking that is what they want to hear. I refuse to believe that if people had enough about what does the BBI mean for my education, what does the BBI mean, that I don't have to go and start Googling or I don't have to start reading for myself, that I can actually trust the media as an informative, objective source of information. I will actually appreciate that.
Mohammed, let me get to you. Maybe you might console me because Stephanie's telling me I can start an agenda and push it and hopefully she might be number one viewer. But you're saying we are the ones who have conditioned the media. We have a bias as well on what we want to hear. I don't know what your sentiments. I'm not trying to direct your sentiment, but just go ahead.
Yes. I think what Stephanie is doing is that she's blaming the media for taking a stand that she does not agree with. She wants to be given news that she agrees with. And that is the very problem that we are having today, is that people are only tuning into shows to which they agree to which they feel that they are represented. And that is the problem. And the problem can go both ways, that if whatever we think is right, if we give people what we think is right, then we are conditioning them. When we give them something that they don't think is right, and other people consume that, as per Stephanie, we are equally conditioning this other group. So what do I suggest? Purely be a transmitter of the happenings of the day. This happened here, report as it is. Maybe what you could do is probably question it without taking any extreme. Question it. Why did it happen? Was it necessary for it to happen? Without conditioning me to believe that it was not necessary for this to happen.
Okay.
That is what I believe media guys should do. And I think that is the objectivity. That is only when we will reach at objectivity. Thank you.
All
very
right.
much.
Thanks a lot. Let me cross over to Grace. Grace, and I know you have a mouthful because normally when three people have spoken, you must have collected a lot. But what could you say in quick summary?
I'd compare the role of the media to education. How we learn history. History is very whitewashed, it's very male, it's elitist, it is very Nairobi, I would say, how we learn history. And it's the same thing. You put a TV presenter who looks good and you say this is the 9 p.m. news, and they go. And that becomes what we know over time. And so I think, let the media set an agenda. Do I trust the media to set an agenda? What exactly is the agenda? Who's the person behind the person I'm seeing on screen right now? And so I don't necessarily think I trust the media to set an agenda, but maybe they should transmit exactly what's happening every single day. Yes. So then how do we find a balance between, I cannot fully trust you with an agenda, but then also I want to be able to know exactly what has happened. And I think that's what we're trying to strike right now. But I don't think any media house should have the responsibility to set an agenda. Who are you catering to? There's such a large audience, and I don't think Stephanie is trying to get her own type of news. I think what she's saying is, I am not being addressed, and I would like to be addressed. I would like to be catered to as part of your audience. So then can we find a way that the media can report and address all of these people, can address not only Nairobi, can address not only males, can address not only elitists, can be able to address everyone? Yes, they can. That is exactly what they're trained to do. So why are they not doing it? And so I don't necessarily think any one person can bless an agenda. Even I wouldn't, like that responsibility, because it's too much. Who exactly do I cater to if not my own people, my own belief systems and values,
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot, Grace, there. Now, we are concluding now, and I think I would want each of you to just have your 45 seconds and give your unbiased opinion on this subject, all right? Must be unbiased, but I just wanted to throw two things that I feel, I won't call them takeouts, but one of it is that every journalist who goes through training, because we have had a lot of them who just first of all get into media and then start looking for a certificate when a lot of journalists made some noise, that there is a code of conduct that is expected of them. so that you're not the brown envelope kind of journalist where you're paid in to just create the story that is supposed to be done. And I think there was a lot of that during the Moise era, but we have seen a lot of good changes, yes. But also there is now a lot of hands that Mohammed has alluded to on the commercial angle of the media, where now the government has gotten to know, because it's a chief advertiser, it decides now, listen, if you guys will not play to the agenda that we want, we'll muzzle the money that we give to you. And I know people may try to crucify me on this, but I believe that the start of MyGov, you know, that particular excerpt that we have there, was purely a way of also trying to muzzle and tell them that, listen, we can decide not to advertise on your ends. And out of that, we have seen a lot of mass exodus of journalists because now they could not be sustained. And it's quite sad. But a real government is the one that allows itself to be critiqued as well. And a good and healthy society is where the media is very objective and speaks truth to even power and everybody else around. But now, to the concluding remarks now, and I know you may want to give in some other rebuttals in there. Please close them down, hold them up. It's your unbiased opinion, and I think I will start from that end there. So I'll give it to you, Jane. But this is what I would want you to do. I would want you to look straight at that camera and speak directly your own unbiased opinion on this. Go ahead.
Oh, definitely. For us to get to a place of objectivity in media, one, we have to deconstruct the idea of media personalities. I don't have to subscribe to your personality to understand the story that you're trying to tell. So tell it as it is. You don't have to package it. She doesn't have to be too pretty. She doesn't have to be too bougie. It just has to be the story. To maintain objectivity, say it as it is. And just to tap into the people, we, the receivers, we ought to learn to be comfortable hearing uncomfortable stories, so that when it doesn't conform to your value system or what you think it's right, it's a story that's still worth telling, because it subscribes to an agenda that's different from yours. So that's my takeaway.
Okay, I love this. Well, I think at some point I got carried away by what you were saying, but thanks a lot for that. Stephanie, over to you straight away. I would want you to look straight in there and give your unbiased opinion.
My unbiased opinion is that there is so much as regards the media. And the reason why I still believe that the media and the people are separate entities is because some of these journalists are underpaid. Some of these journalists fear for their security. There is so much that happens in a media station that does not, like, leading up to the point where you get your news, yeah? And while all that needs to be taken into consideration, the media has created a space that gives them the autonomy to shape public opinion. And that is the immense power that the media holds. And the media has been given the space, to a certain extent, to flex its muscles. And while we constantly fight for the media to have greater space, we need to be convinced that in the space you are doing what that space requires of you, so that we feel the need for you to expand. So I am genuinely a believer in the role of the media and the part that it has to play. But I still believe that where it is now, there is work to be done. And that work to be done is outside of the prettiest face, it's outside of the funniest caption for the news, it's outside of all that, and leaning very, very closely to what is the output at the end of the day. We of course need to hear that the president wants to take another wife, but we also need to hear he was going to look for ABCD and thought, wow, I can take another wife. Yes.
Thanks a lot, Stephanie. All right, Mohammed, over to you. Your concluding remarks on this subject today. Straight to that camera facing you. Go ahead.
So Maina, yes. For the media in the country, I'll hold you accountable for inconclusive stories that do not tell the story. But I'll congratulate you for in-depth stories that tell the story the way it is supposed to be told. I'll hold you accountable for intentional misinformation, because intentional misinformation kills people, sheds blood, kills businesses, overthrows genuine governments. However, clickbait pays the bills, as sad as it is, as sad as it may be. I am okay with clickbait. To the people, I'll tell you probably, try and consume news from smaller outlets, from outliers, and if any way possible, dry out the papers from the conglomerates. If anything, wrap the meat using those papers. Yes, and for the media, when you impress me with good stories, even though Grace might not like it, I'll treat you like dogs. I'll give you treats, because that is what we should do. We should congratulate them for the good stories. But when you disappoint, we will hold you accountable very much. Thank you very much.
Wow. All right, thank you so much, Mohammed. And finally, we will have Grace. Grace, I would want you to face that direction and speak your final remarks as well.
Okay, thank you. I want Sunday evenings back, where we'd discuss what exactly is on the news and not just who's marrying who or which reggae is playing or not. I would like to have important, solid conversations. I want better for myself, and I think the Kenyan people also want and deserve better. And also, I would implore you that in the same way that you expect good service when you go to your doctor, in the same way that you expect good service from your mechanic, I implore that you do your job. And you know what? Congratulations. I think you're doing your job, and you should continue to do your job. Thank you.
Wow. Thanks so much, Grace. And I think from us here, I know this is an ongoing conversation. It can't end, because we have discussions even on content, what kind of content as well we have been getting from the media, how it's affecting us on our daily lives, the younger generations. We have a lot of people who are gun blazing about what we are seeing and all that. But for now, I don't know whether we have answered the question to the people online or whether they have been left as well as I am, still thinking whether the media has failed. There's a yes, there's a no. I still think I'm caught in between. But to those who are doing a great job, as we have said here on the debate circle, keep doing what you're doing. By the way, it's sort of like a question I might want to ask you guys. If, for example, an Anne Keguta, assuming she's doing a great job, decides, you know what, guys, these guys have decided to fire me, and I'm going to start my own side thing. Mohammed, are you going to be the first person who sends 100 bob every month for her salary?
Absolutely. Whereas, not to Anne Keguta, sadly.
Okay, no, it was just an example, but thanks a lot for that. But I think what Mohammed is saying is that we need to also be the people that support truthful, objective journalists of today, so they don't have to wait for the paycheck that is coming from people who have already a bias on those angles. And for those who are media owners, it's good to also address them. Please know that whom much is given as well much is required. Be objective, give us the news as it should be, so that at least we can end up. I'm seeing the director saying something from my end, but I think I just want to conclude now because time is up. And from us here on the debate circle, we don't want to say bye-bye, is that the conversation keeps on going. See you for now. I hope you still go ahead tweeting and telling us what your opinion is. All the best. Bye-bye.